Well, I am so excited for today's episode. Welcome to the show. We have Heidi Moss Erickson. Welcome back to A Voice and Beyond.
Thank you. I feel so honored to be a two-timer, so I need a little badge or something for that. So thank you for having me back. It's always a joy, as you know, speaking with you.
Yeah, yes, we're kind of dangerous together.
It is.
Yes, but I don't have a badge for you. I'm so sorry.
That's
However, guess what's made its return? The,
Oh my goodness,
the
it's the return
swear
of
jar.
the swear jar.
Yes,
Yes,
Heidi.
I've been known to drop a few bombs. My apologies in advance if they come out, but you can just stick them right in there and we'll be good.
I have to tell you something funny about the swear jar. I had biscuits in, or cookies as you call them, and you can still see the crumbs in the bottom. And I served them up to my grandchildren. And they said, Nonny, what, what's a swear jar? Why are the cookies in the swear jar? And I said, long
Oh
story, and you'd have to meet Heidi to get it.
no. Oh no. Yeah, now I'm going to be known for corrupting grandchildren. That's great.
Well, I'd rather you corrupt them than someone else.
Yes.
Anyway, Heidi, I'm going to do the formal intro to start with. So, you're an acclaimed performer, voice educator, and scientist who prefers to describe you like to describe yourself as a seeker. You hold a double biology degree and a master's degree in biochemistry from the University of Pennsylvania, as well as a music degree from Oberlin. You've been on the show before, and the last time you were here, we talked a lot about neuroscience, but today we're going to go down a little bit of a different path, and I don't know where this is going to take us, and I'm just going to let this evolve. But you and I have both gone through a lot since 2021 when we first talked on the podcast. We've both suffered loss. We've both been going through a grieving process. And first up, I'd like to ask how you are going and how's your family going?
Oh, that means a lot. Thank you. I mean, every day is different. And I think, sometimes these lessons of how we go through life and what's thrown at us is a model for other things, like singing every day is different. So I just approach it from where I'm at in that moment. And of course, there are good days and bad days. And, supporting my family and supporting myself, sometimes we can neglect the latter. So I've been working harder at that.
Yes. Do you mind sharing your
Not at
loss?
all. Yeah. So my stepdaughter, who was 18 years old, killed herself about 6 weeks ago, and she had been suffering from mental health issues for a while. So it is a tragedy when you see a young person have to go through that, and just the impact. You see this kind of ripple effect where it just, the people that are affected by it, I'm sure she wouldn't even realize, but my daughters are close, obviously my husband. And I had my own struggles growing up along those same lines. So there's almost this kind of resurrection of feelings and things that I had gone through when I was her age. And so those complicated feelings that you just try to unravel to be the best person I can for my family and myself.
And it is a process like no other when it is a
Right.
suicide. Any death is a tragic loss, but suicide affects people in a completely different way. And for the listeners, I have shared the story before that my first husband committed suicide. I was 26 years old and I had a 5-year-old daughter.
Mm.
And that I completely shut down physically, where I
Mm.
didn't menstruate for 5 years.
Oh
I
my
went into a
gosh.
deep shock. I developed an eating disorder through that time. I was doing everything I could. Above water, I was like that duck that was swimming gracefully, but
Mm.
underneath, I was under the water. I was just treading water. I don't know how I hung on, but also to my mother tried to commit suicide when I was 18 years old, and she ended up in what they used to call back in those days a mental asylum.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't the understanding around mental health that there is today, and we're going to talk about this in a more positive light in a moment. And
Yes.
you know, for anyone that's been triggered by this, you know, I suggest you go and seek help. But
Mm-hmm.
with my
Yeah, in the
mother,
US you can call 988. That's
yes,
just throw out that number.
yes,
Yeah.
and we have Lifeline here and Beyond Blue. But for my mum, she received sleep treatment. I would go and visit my mum every day, and that was for 2 months in this asylum, and people were receiving shock treatment. I saw the impact of all of that as a teenager, and so I have an understanding of what it's like, and I have come through the other end as a survivor of all those situations. And we all deal with things as best as we can. And today we're going to talk about, though, the relationship between the brain and the mind, and the things that we can possibly do to improve our brain health, our mindset from a science perspective, and that there are small things that we can do that can help us. But we need to develop an understanding of all those things.
Yes. And I just want to say, we were speaking offline about you being a beacon of light. And I think having people like you and who show that you can come out of this resilient and positive and joyful and still lead a great life, I think is really the take home message, because I think people who are feeling that way, even in grief, feeling lost, to see that it is like the seasons, that you can change and evolve. And as you said, people look at you and I look at you and I just see this radiant being. So it's a testament to you, but I think it's the model we need in this world right now.
Yes, and you know, everything happens to us for a reason. And as corny as that sounds, and as cliche as that sounds, and I believe those things happen to me for a purpose, and I feel like this is my purpose.
Yeah.
I feel the purpose here is to serve others and to help others and to show others that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And
Yes.
I've had that feedback, and I had that feedback very personally recently from someone that I am associated with professionally, who didn't realize what I had been through, and they couldn't believe that there was a light at the end of the tunnel for them and their grief.
Right.
And watching me and having observed me in life over the last few years without them realizing that I had been through what they were going through, it gave them hope and it gave them a light.
Right.
So if I can help one person, then I've served my purpose and I've served my mission, and it hasn't been a waste of a life.
Right. Oh, I feel the same way. You're going to make me cry in this thing. So we'll get to the hope part. But I wrote a very long article. I didn't think anyone would read it, but it was called Taming the Black Dog, on my own experience for that same reason. I said, if one person reads this and feels hopeful, then I've had my life's purpose. So
yeah,
we're going to create another opportunity to hopefully, if we can reach one person who may not see the light right now, we're going to try to, and I'm not a mental health professional. I should say that right out of the gate. I come at it from background in neuroscience, but also personal experience and an understanding of biology in the brain and the body. But, there's mental health is a different category in the professional sense. So I just want to get that caveat out there. See a professional always.
Yes, yes. And later we're going to talk about how this impacts in the teaching studio and some of those boundaries between being a singing teacher and a therapist as well.
Correct.
We'll get to that. Okay.
We'll get to the boundaries. All right, here we go.
Okay. Okay.
Reboot.
Reset here.
Deep breath.
We've
There we
got
go.
this, Heidi.
We've got it. High five
Okay.
through the screen. Okay.
Yes, yes. And swear jar. Swear
And
as
swear
much
jar.
as you like.
Yes, we're gonna
No.
fucking do it. Okay, there we go. I did it. Sorry.
I'm going to be rich by the end of this.
No. Okay.
Okay. So, Heidi,
Yes.
what is the difference between the mind and the brain? Let's just start with basics here.
Dive in with the biggies, because this is honestly a debate between neuroscientists and philosophers. And I don't think they've come to a clear conclusion, but how I see it through both of those lenses is the mind is actually, if you think of an iceberg, there's a tip of the iceberg of what you see, and then there's everything else underneath it. And the tip of the iceberg is very small comparative to what's underneath. And I think the mind is what we experience as conscious beings, is what we feel, see, sense, can think about, can ruminate, something that has that conscious kind of thought to it. And even the subconscious mind, because it fuels. But then there's all of these operations that are going on underneath that are very complex, that are sort of competing with each other for attention from the mind. And so we can use our minds to shift attention to things. Mm-hmm. And I think that is helpful for mental health. I think it's helpful for physical health, is the power of attention to help our minds get in control, because there's such a wealth of things in the brain that we can tap into.
So would you call then the brain is the physical structure and the mind is more like the emotional and the subconscious and the conscious?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some people probably define it that way. I mean, I think the mind is definitely not something I can hold in my hand, right? It's this essence that I'm aware of. I'm aware of what I'm saying, or I'm aware of engaging in this. There's probably subconscious things in that equation. Yeah, so maybe the brain is that physical thing, and it's all connected. And I think that's the thing we sometimes like to separate: mind, brain, body, environment. But I call it the brain, body, environment continuum, because in this whole, we have different places that we can sneak into to change or alter or attend to, that can really shape how we think and feel. And the biggest thing I want to give is agency to people, because sometimes we feel like we're out of control. The world feels out of control.
Yes.
And I think we can use the power of our minds and our brains as a unit to sort of take control and have agency in our lives. Because that's what I think makes us feel powerless, is when we feel like we don't have any agency.
100%. And that's probably when I'm at my most anxious in life.
Yes.
Is that feeling of not having control and things spiraling, and
right.
You being the observer and
Yes.
not the participant in that actual, whatever it is, that incident, that moment in time. So what are the important parts of the brain that we need to be aware of, like those parts that we need to know and understand, that need to be healthy and remain healthy from a mental, physical, and emotional perspective?
Yeah, I think there's so many parts. Again, I'm going to go back to the whole, but I think I like to think of it in terms of evolution and sociology are much faster than our biology. So we still are, Homo sapien as cave people. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at the life of that kind of being versus the life that we have now, they're very, very different. And what we eat is different. How we see sunlight, basic things, how we take breaks, the amount of stress, the amount of stimulus, all of these things are against our biology. And so I think sometimes when I tap, I think what we can all do is tap into some fundamental things like getting good sleep. That is number one. We need sleep to function. One thing that can help sleep is seeing natural sunlight first thing in the morning. It can
Yes.
be filtered, but I go out, whether it's, cold, cloudy, dark, when the sun's low, but just that, any kind of natural light. They do have light boxes that they sell, but
Yes.
yeah, there's a biochemical there. You get this little spike, it goes through the retina. You get this little spike of cortisol, the good kind of spike of cortisol, not the bad kind, which we'll talk about later.
Hmm.
And that sets your brain body for a schedule for your circadian and ultradian rhythms. And I remember when I was most depressed in my life, I was working in a lab and I didn't even have to leave the building. I could stay, I was in New York City and I could go from my apartment to the lab and never see the light of day. And
Yes.
and then I couldn't sleep at night. I was an insomniac. I would stay up until 2 and 3 in the morning and then get up. And that cumulative effect was destructive in my mental and physical health. So these little things that seem almost hippie-ish, I'm in San Francisco, but they really have biological merit. And I think that's the first step, is to tap into just that kind of circadian rhythm routine.
It's so true what you're saying. At the moment, I'm into my second week of official holidays. Well, I'm off
Yes.
my teaching job. I'm on break, so I
Mhm.
don't have to leave the house. And
Right.
I used to, I'm still doing my normal exercise routine, walking to the gym, walking to Pilates, trying to go
Mhm.
for a walk. But it's the extent of leaving the house is not the
Right.
same. And I'm already feeling the difference in my mood, but
Right.
also I feel that I'm not walking around as much as I was before. I'm not moving around. I'm not having that social connection, that
Right.
all those things that we need for our mental health. I
Right.
feel like they have really been minimized.
Right.
And people say, oh, you must be so excited to be on break. But I think, no, I actually need that routine and the structure of
Right.
work and all the things that came along with it for my mental health.
Yes, 1,000%. And you touched on two other things. We talked about getting outside and seeing sunlight, walking. Everyone drives or take public transportation. Now, there is another element biologically, it's called optic flow, if people want to Google it, that is part of that calming. And you think of our species, again, we would be hunter-gatherers. We would walk from one place to the next. And now people aren't even walking, so they're not getting that
Mm.
optic flow process. And then the third thing you mentioned is social connection. We function in groups. We weren't meant, my sister made this funny joke. She said she lives in this kind of community, and she said her oven broke and she had to buy a new oven, but she had months without an oven. She said, how crazy it is that I live in this development where everyone around me has an oven.
Mm.
Everyone buys their own oven and they cook in isolation. She said, I wish I were a cave person where we all cooked together
Yes,
and helped each other and raised each other's kids. And so we've become more isolationist, which
yes.
also oxytocin, all of these biochemical markers of what we're wired to be like have been forgotten sometimes.
Mm. I was interstate recently where I have a second home now, I can call it, in Melbourne. I live in
Ooh.
Queensland and on the Gold
Mm.
Coast, but I have purchased a place in Melbourne where I grew up. And I found that I was so much calmer and so much happier down there. So I figure that is my safe haven and my place of joy. And being at home here is my workplace.
Yeah, your brain is like shifting, it's set and setting,
Yeah.
right? It's like, I
Mm.
know what this is, and that will have a certain
Mm.
chemistry associated with
Yes.
it. And then you go
And the
there. Yeah.
yeah, the balance of the two is what's going to be good for my mental health, I feel.
Right. And that's good too, is knowing thyself, which is another thing, is
Mm.
people are very different. We're neurodiverse. And so some people need, more people around them, other people need a different balance of that. So
Yes, and owning it too.
mm-hmm.
Being
Yep.
aware of it and just owning it and saying,
Yeah.
acknowledging this is what makes me happy. This is what makes me unhappy.
That's where the monster comes in, because there's no judgment. That's the thing that has to go, is
Yes.
our, you know, my husband used to say comparison is the thief of joy. And I think there's so much
Mm,
comparison in this world. People are looking at TikTok and saying, I wish I had this, or I wish I did this. And I think that's the other thing that can be detrimental, because when we compare, we're not in our present. We're in a rumination that is not healthy, because we are not with ourselves and embracing and accepting ourselves. And I think
mm,
that can tie into being a voice teacher, and our students as well, is they will compare, right? And how can you shift their mindset from saying, I want to sing like this person or this person? You can use them as mimicry, but embrace their own artistry and identity and voice, and have them fall in love with that.
mm. That's going to be a discussion for the next part of this session, because we're going to talk about our role as teachers as well.
Yes,
And
right,
that's where I feel that we need to intervene
right.
also and make sure that we're not imposing when it comes to judgment.
Right.
Yeah,
Give
just,
everyone monsters. I just give everyone monsters and think that
mhm.
that does everything, but it
Well,
doesn't. I'm kidding.
we want to give the monster. We don't want to be the monster in the
Exactly.
teaching studio. Okay, so what
Yeah.
is the relationship then between the brain and our state of mind?
So these questions, I think neuroscientists and philosophers would have a field day. I love that question. I do this little game of attention when I give lectures. It's sort of, and there are a ton of them on YouTube, where, you know, they do something and you think you're counting the number of balls, or you're looking at something and then you completely miss it. And I think states of mind, and it seems like it's unconscious, but they're a choice. And how that works is we get signals from our body. It's called interoception, whether we're aware of them or not. If our heart rate goes up, our brain can ascribe that, say, oh, I'm anxious. Our brain can say, I just had coffee. Our brain can say, I'm nervous about something. So we label, we construct a mindset based on what sensory information we're receiving.
Mm,
And that can be, as I said, it can be physical, it can be triggered by a location or a person or a task. And we sometimes think that we're passive in that mindset. And I think the key is to almost be hyper aware of that. I know when I had severe depression, I would say, you know, I have a lot of autoimmune things. That's what caused my facial paralysis. And I would get a feeling of I am tired, because I have Hashimoto's and I have autoimmune. And what would happen is, instead of just saying I'm tired, let's rest, because that's what my body's telling me, I would say I am tired. I am not productive. I am a
mm.
terrible person. I should die. Right? It's like it goes through this. I mean, I'm, you know,
Yes.
shortening
Yeah.
the thing, but it just shows you what mindset is from a physical feeling, when or from just a construction of a judgment about a situation. So we are constructors of our emotional experiences,
Mm,
and that's based on, you know, past experience, genetics, you know, there's lots of
mm.
factors. But the realization that I was doing that, instead of just saying I feel tired and stopping there, and I went through this, it was a well-wired pathway that I struggle with to this day, that it's easy for me to go not to the last step, but at least from I'm not a good productive person, right?
Mhm.
And so I think mindset comes from, and maybe if you're talking about mindset to action, but that's the seed of it. And so if we want mindset to do something, or to be positive, I think it's that idea of being aware of your body, of when your heart rate goes up. And if you tend to get anxious, find ways to tap in to maybe calming your heart rate, whether it's hypnosis or meditation or breath work, to sort of switch that off. Easier said than done, but I do think you could tap into what I call interoception, exteroception, and dissociation. And I find that it's the balance between those three. If you're a feeling person, which a lot of us musicians are, we tend to be very
creative,
interoceptive. Yeah. We're into our own feelings, whether they're physical feelings or mental feelings, very deeply. And that's what makes us good artists. But there's a dark side to that ability. And so, you know, everyone has a different strategy. I found I do cold plunges. I need something so strong externally. And I think that's where some of my self-harm behaviors used to come from. But that idea of something external that's so dramatic, and I can actually calm myself in that cold water and I feel better. Now that's just my personal biohacking, but you know, being aware of that can help. And then that shifts my mindset to not go down that rabbit hole.
And there's a lot of research around that around the cold showers, even having a cold shower for the last few minutes of being in the shower, those cold baths, like the Wim Hof method.
Yes,
all
exactly.
that stuff there's so much science around that. Personally, I couldn't do it.
I couldn't do it in the beginning either. I was one of those people that, like, my toe goes in the cold ocean. I'm like, no, thank you. But I got used to it and it was empowering, really was.
There were so many things that were going through my mind when you were describing all of that. One was, it's almost like in the brain, we have a filing cabinet. And that filing cabinet is full of all the stories, all the experiences, all the learnings of our life. And our mind is the way that we process those and how we relate to those and how we react to those, and which story gets pulled out in that moment in time.
Exactly. And I think that's a great metaphor for what happens, because people, you know, the conscious thing that we think that we're reacting in real time. But in fact, everything we do and think and feel is predictive, which means everything is happening before we do it. And it makes sense because we need to be flexible in the world. I need to be able to react and have that kind of adrenaline if a tiger's going to come, or know what's danger, or know what's safety. And so the brain has a way of collecting information about a situation so that it can make a decision on what to do. So if I've seen a tiger at an intersection before, you know, there's always a tiger there and I need to run, what's going to happen is when I show up to that intersection, my brain's going to pull those things and say, your heart rate's going to go up, you're going to have adrenaline, and you need to run. Even if that doesn't happen, because it's taking information from those filing cabinets, and it's all of these connections. And so the challenge is, can you override them?
It's almost like a brain hack.
It is.
Like the ice bath for you, the icy shower, the cold pool, whatever it was.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying, where there are more ways than we realize to intervene, whether it's exteroceptive or interoceptive, to rewire something we want to rewire. And I think that's the hope piece, that we are so capable as humans to rewire a lot of things that we think are just permanent. And I think that's another thing our society does, is this happens to me. Oh, it happened to me. I have no agency. It's poor me. It happened to me. And I think that mindset is not a growth, you know, even though fixed and growth mindsets are sort of controversial right now, it's not a growth mindset. It's not the mindset that I can change, I can improve, I can get over things that you can't, that other people may not feel like they can, but you can. you know?
That's having a victim mentality, is you being stuck in that victim mentality actually doesn't
Yes,
serve that
right.
person or us,
Exactly.
whoever it is. It doesn't serve, it doesn't help for you to get out of that mindset. So
Yes.
can you have a healthy mind
Yes.
without a healthy brain, or vice versa?
I would say no. I think, they're interconnected, and there's so much research going on right now that I'm very excited about in terms of brain health. That sort of explains, and this is a guy named Chris Palmer at Harvard, if people are interested. But it goes back to, we think the brain is disconnected sometimes, but metabolism, whether it's physical health and nutrition and all of that, inflammatory issues, people are seeing it with long COVID, the brain fog, the mood, these are all challenges with brain health, right? With the cells in the brain, and we see it in neurodegenerative disorders. The cells in the brain are not functioning optimally. And it's a complex organ that's interconnected. So if our brain is not functioning ideally, it will manifest in things. It could be depression, it could be manic depression, it could be schizophrenia, it could be, there's a million things that unhealthy brain can have, a phenotype, we call it. But the common cause is these cells are not happy, and there's an imbalance, and they're not functioning well. So we need to really understand what brain health is. And there's not one answer right now, but I think the tide is turning from these kinds of sort of going into what I was talking about, the Homo sapien thing, the anti-inflammatory ideas, and this guy's talking about mitochondria if people are interested in the micro stuff. So by focusing on brain health, we will translate into mind health and mindset and just be better humans.
How do things such as trauma, our genetic makeup, alcohol and drug abuse, or the physical structure of the brain, how do they impact on mental health problems?
Oh gosh. And again, these are very complex equations, so I don't mean to summarize, but it's interesting you put
Yes.
genetic in there, because a lot of people misunderstand genetics, because there's two angles to that. There is the passing on of a gene from your parent to child that's sort of fixed. But there's another element of genetics called epigenetics, which is how the DNA is sort of coded by different things that affects the expression of things. What trauma or alcoholism or these things, behaviors, can do to brain health through epigenetics is that it can alter gene expression in a way that impacts brain health. And so when you have a psychological trauma or physical trauma, you can impact the genetic nature of cells, alter their functionalities. Also, that thing can be passed on. There's studies on epigenetic transfer between generations. So someone who had trauma or was an abuser, or, those kinds of things, that it's not at the genetic level of DNA, it's at this epigenetic level that gets transferred. Now that is changeable, but it's harder. And so I think that's where the science is going to be really important, is overcoming some of those epigenetic changes, in addition to just sort of, chemical and other things that are going on.
The reason why I asked about the genetic makeup is because obviously, my mother was
Mm-hmm.
unwell. I do
Yes.
suffer from anxiety, and it can be chronic at times. My
Mm-hmm.
girls suffer from anxiety. I have some cousins who
Yes.
also, on my mother's side, who are also highly anxious, and
Mm-hmm.
their anxiety has caused things like some major gut problems.
Yes, that's another thing, that the brain the continuum between those two, the gut brain connection is very important, and that's new also. And it's interesting we're simpatico on that, because I have a long lineage of depression and suicide in my own family. My grandmother was on the first clinical trial of tricyclic antidepressants at Columbia, but she ended up taking her own life. And I have other relatives too. So that's what started my passion, honestly. When I was, 16 or 17, I started diving into, because my parents were very, this is genetic. When I had certain symptoms, you got this from your grandmother. And that made me feel hopeless, because if someone's saying you're born this way and you can't change it, let's just give you drugs and maybe it'll help, you feel like you have this label on you for life. And that's sort of why I wrote the article I did, is because I am not that label, and I don't have, even if there was this genetic or epigenetic component, mood disorders are never one thing. You can maybe, it can maybe skew you that you're more vulnerable to it, but that idea that you're doomed is false. And I think that's the thing that's happening in psychiatry now, at least that I'm seeing. Again, I'm not a licensed person, but I see the pendulum shifting away from this kind of, you're this, you're this, you're this, here's a drug, here's a drug, here's a drug. It's much more complex. And we can start with some of these lifestyle brain health interventions, and not stopping your medication, but you can't do one without the other. You can't not have sunlight, not have a healthy diet, not have, have endless stress and take medications and think you're going to be better. You need both. You need the lifestyle interventions.
100%, 100%. And I mean, I try and do all the right things myself in terms of looking after my mental health, because I have to, I acknowledge that, and I know the importance of exercise. I try and eat an anti-inflammatory diet.
Yes.
Yeah. Sleep, hydration, just social connection. I'm very aware of all those things. And there are times when those things aren't enough, because there's something really crappy going on in your environment that you have no control over, because we can't control other people that are around us. We can only control the way that we react. And sometimes then it's really hard to do that when you're in overwhelm. It's all too much.
1,000%. And that's the challenge we face. There's a great scientist, Lisa Feldman Barrett, who talks about budgets. And I sort of like this metaphor of a body budget, but it's associated with the brain, where you have this kind of credit debit system. And if you're depleted, if your budget's low, and there's something that is going to disturb that budget, like a stressor, you're not going to be able to handle it. And so I really try to make the system so that I am healthier, so that I have a little more leeway when those things that are taking away from my budget enter the system. But as you said, part of being human, if it were all, candy canes and bonbons and, we wouldn't be able to experience the joy. So
exactly,
in those
appreciate the joy. Also.
Yeah. So I think, in a way, what the cold plunge is a metaphor for me is giving myself an extreme stressor, because it's not pleasant. It's really cold. And can I control my response to it, even though it is a big stressor? And I think that's what I like about that kind of isolated experiment. And what it does is, when I am having a stressor that's a person or a situation, my brain remembers that ability, because it's all about prediction. So my brain remembers, Heidi, you got through that cold as F. I didn't want to have another square dog. Cold as fuck plunge. The swear jar is up.
I know. I'm bringing it to San Francisco next.
Okay, yes. Yeah. So that idea of being able to overcome that is empowering. And I think it doesn't dilute the impact of what society's throwing at us or the unpleasant interactions that we have to deal with. I do try to remove myself because I know I'm a sensitive person. I'm hypersensitive. Even on social media, I can like cry if I read something that just, you know, makes me feel bad. And so I have to know that about myself. So I'll try to temper that, you know, anyway. So
I get that.
It's not easy. It's not easy. So what you experience, you know, is normal, and it doesn't help to say that. But if your anxiety is, you know, if your budget is like this, then it's time to maybe see someone and you know, get help, that another intervention or strategy.